Hello, welcome. Take a seat. Oh, let me take that shrapnel out of your glass. If you want to eat, we have two-headed duck, barely radioactive. If your hands still function, I leave you with a menu while I bring you a drink that is hardly contaminated at all. Oh, excuse me. I forget to say. Welcome to the guild. Oh, isn't this beautiful? Because of the cruel, harsh nature of the post-ozone sun, my suntan is astonishing. Because lobster has become incredibly fashionable in this age. I mean, the fact that I don't have more than the requisite number of limbs makes me more attractive than 95% of the population. But this red, vibrant colour, I mean, you look really pale. How are you doing that?
It's because I've been in the compound so long. You've just invited me out to the beach. You know, I have to keep myself inside, away from the zombie hordes. And I must say, it's quite handy all the lobsters come ready cooked nowadays.
Well, that's true. And if you look in the ocean, it's wonderful. You see the glittering oil slicks at play on the waves, and the jellyfish glow by themselves. It's absolutely gorgeous, the iridescence of radiation.
I can't express how wonderful it is to be outside, having been cooped up for so many months with the slavering hordes. Really, it's just amazing, and the irradiated jellyfish is just the icing on the irradiated cake.
I mean, what have you been doing to, keep yourself occupied? I've been outside. I mean, to be honest, it's been perfectly safe within the compound. You didn't need to do it, but what have you been doing with yourself?
Well, stuff that you can't mention on a family podcast, of course.
Yeah, because if this is anything, it's a family podcast. Absolutely. I make sure not to use any rude words like bastard shitters, and I make sure that it's good, solid Christian entertainment.
There is no answer to that. There's somebody called Christian listening.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if you're familiar, but I go around the compound on a Segway, and I boost people's spirits by asking them questions about board games. And I managed to get a few questions in, and it was sort of related to your sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Self-imposed exile idea.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was asking them. Have you ever suffered burnout with games? And if so, what's the cure? Now, you've been a gamer for as long as your hair is. So, I mean,
that'd be about me. You've got me on video. I have. That's really not.
No,
not
I haven't got you on video. You're lying in a sun lounger next to me on an irradiated beach.
Of course I am. Yes, this is a video link with the compound. A video link with the rest of the compound, of course, yes.
That's right, a video link with the rest of the compound.
Well, and of course, all my hair has fallen out because of the irradiation.
I think it's a lack of vitamin E, to be honest.
Well, that's why I'm on the beach now, you see.
Indeed. So, yeah, I mean, you've been a gamer for forever. Have you ever experienced, burnout? Have you ever had a period in your gaming career where you just thought, I just can't be bothered to do this anymore?
Yes. Many times, and every time the answer is to play a different kind of game, because I like board games, and when I get fed up with board games, I play a miniatures game. When I get fed up with miniatures games, I play a role-playing game. When I get fed up with role-playing games, I play a video game. And by the time I've run the whole gamut, I'm normally back up for some board gaming action again.
And so is it always... I mean, if you add consistent gaming in your life from... Well, I mean, just for the listeners in the compound... What's your potted history of gaming anyway?
Well, I've actually, you say for a long time, it's about 35 years I've been playing games. I discovered Dungeons and Dragons.
You look so youthful.
Oh, it's the irradiated suntan that's doing
true.
that.
Irradiation is wonderful. I feel like a golden delicious apple. It's brilliant.
Well, it's going to kill you in the end, but in the meantime, it makes you look and feel brilliant. No, so I discovered Dungeons and Dragons because of a book that I happened to pick up off a bookstall, and I played that for some years. And back in the days, I mean, this was in the 80s. You couldn't be a gamer in the UK without coming across Games Workshop products, and that's how I found miniatures games and a few board games as well. My first few board games like Fury of Dracula, Dungeon Quest, and things like that. Then it was mostly Dungeons and Dragons, and then I kind of got fed up really with looking for Dungeons and Dragons groups because it's a really personality-dependent game.
Really,
role-playing games generally are, and I got tired of that trying to fit square pegs into round holes thing.
And even if the personality of the people are great, you always spend most of the time doing the RPG fandango, where you're sort of like, can you do Thursday? Oh no, I can't do Thursday. Can you do Saturday? No, I can't do Saturday. And you just never end up playing, right?
Yeah, well, nowadays I do one-shots, which are great, but of course one-shots didn't really exist 30 years ago. Yeah.
And so, you've played a lot of minis games.
Yes.
And the one thing that hits me, I don't play them much. I just started playing Blood Bowl actually, but the thing that sort of hits me about minis games is it seems to be replete with sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Finicky assholes who are super competitive and they monitor every inch you move. I mean, it must, over a time, especially with sort of, faction creep and rules upon rules upon rules, lend itself to burnout, right?
Yes, it does. But it depends what kind of miniatures games you're playing, because what you've just described essentially is Games Workshop. And you get that a lot in Games Workshop. So what I did after I did my Dungeons & Dragons burnout, if you like, is I played Warhammer heavily enough to be on the tournament circuit, and you do get that kind of finicky rules lawyering there, and you have to have judges and people that come over and check your measured distances and stuff like that. But there are plenty of other kinds of miniatures games. There's historical miniatures games, and there's just silly miniatures games where you can have dinosaurs and wizards and robots and whatnot. And there are so many different rule systems that you can use with your small collection of miniatures that you don't have to play like that, and you don't have to meet people like that either.
And have you ever just said to yourself, oh fuck this, I'm just gonna take
Family
2
show.
months at a
Family
game.
show, Ben. Come on.
Sorry. I do apologise to the Johnsons in Chalet 16. I know that their little children have not heard the word fuck before, but I do apologise. I won't fucking say it again. Yeah, but I mean, have you ever had like months where you're just like, I just don't want a game. I just can't be arsed.
No, I really haven't, because I really enjoy it, and they're all such different things. And I do find this thing where I swing a lot, so swing a lot.
Do you?
Oh, indeed, yes. Yeah.
Oh.
Be careful, family show again.
They've been telling me about you back at the compound.
Oh, well, as I said, you had to do something to while away all those long hours in the darkness.
Stallion Matt, I've heard that, and now I've put the face to the name.
If I get fed up with board gaming, I do tend to find I siege quite naturally from being obsessed with board games or a board game to being obsessed with a video game or video games generally. So really, I don't. I've been doing it all these years, and I still love doing it, and I don't feel like I do it enough, in fact.
What I find sometimes is I don't generally tend to get burnt out with games. I definitely tend to get burnt out with types of games. And I think, I went through a period of playing a lot of Splotter type games and Vita Lacerda type games. And you can get burnt out on them super quick, because even just the thought of having to sit down and learn a new rule set that is sometimes, especially with Splotter games, I think they're wonderful, but they can be really counterintuitive and difficult. And just the thought of having to learn that, especially because no one else knows the rules anyway, so you're learning it from the rule book's really frustrating. But I often find I get frustrated with just the inevitable personalities that you sometimes come across. I've not found an arena of life that is quite so pedantic as board gaming, and sometimes I really get burnt out on the pedantry, and I just have to say, no, I need to take 5 days off, a week off, just because I can't stand someone gainsaying everything that comes out of my mouth. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean, but there's two things I need to respond to that. First of all, to go back to what you're saying about rules, that's the one thing I do get burnt out on, is learning rules. I am sick and tired of learning rules. I really, really am. Even the simplest games now, I roll my eyes, and it's like, my God, because I'm always the one that has the games. I'm always the one that reads the games. I'm always the one that teaches the games. And I'm not a great teacher. I don't mind doing it. I'm not great at it. But I am so tired of learning rules. And there was a time a few years ago when I was really into war games, the big ones with the big rule books, 30-page rule books and numbered paragraphs and things like that. And nowadays I just can't be bothered anymore. And it's the rules. It's the rules. I can't be bothered with a game where you've got to, every couple of turns, or every turn, just stop and flick to page 16, paragraph 7.4. and find out whether or not pikemen can successfully stack with musketeers. And it's just like, no, I'm really tired of that now. But to go back to your other point about the pedantry, I'm very lucky, or perhaps, I don't know, I'm very just finicky with who I play with, because I mostly just game with my friends. And
well, I find it's with my friends that I have the most issues, so I must just have a lot of really pedantic friends.
Oh, possibly, yes. I mean, if your friends are board gamers, it goes with the territory to some extent, because people that like fiddly rules, page 16, paragraph 7.4, can musketeer stack with pikemen, don't tend to be the most open-minded individuals. They like things organised, they like things right, they like things, their pieces set up in a neat pile, and things to proceed according to fashion.
I mean, the thing is, as the founder of Fortress Ameritrash, you must be sort of conversant with exception and counter-exception, that sort of thing that goes along with those kind of games. And I got burnt out on Ameritrash games super quick. And it's because I hate reading rules. And the first 5 games of any one of those kind of games, you have to keep going back to the rule book 40 times every game you have.
No, absolutely not. No, I'm going to... people talk about this term Ameritrash, which we did kind of invent for the site because there wasn't a word for that kind of game. And it's a good word, but I think people, because it was a new concept, they're not always conversant with what it means. And there are absolutely games like that you're describing. Totally get that. And some people say that war games should be part and parcel of it. But equally, there are plenty of games like, I don't know, Spectre Ops or Nexus Ops, lots of other games with ops in the names, where you've got 8-page rule books, you can teach to play them in 10 minutes, and you can have a great time. You don't have to... Ameritrash for me is about drama, it's about excitement. I always tell people that I'm not a gamer, I'm a failed gambler. Right? Because what I enjoy in gaming most of all is the thrill of throwing dice and peeling cards off the deck, and the stories that come with it. It's the excitement, the raw pleasure of doing that. It's not so much the strategy's fun, but it's a second fiddle to just the fun of not knowing how things are going to fall out.
I mean, I had a really good question then, and I've completely forgotten what it was.
Oh, I stopped you talking. I heard you go. I thought the zombies had come again.
Well, I mean, the zombies are coming everywhere, and I tell you what, the clean-up job is frankly horrendous. I didn't think undeath would make you so bloody horny, to be honest.
No, indeed.
There we are. But I was as I was going round on the Segway, I bumped into Amberona, and she said, at times I've thought maybe I don't like playing games anymore, but then I play a game that I know and love with friends, and it's a great time, and to realise I was just stressed out. Do you have this game that when you think, oh, it's game night and I can't be bothered to read this rule book, do you have that one standby that you go to that you just think, oh, I love this, and I think I'll just get this one out because I know it's going to be successful and I know I'm going to have a good time?
Yeah, and do you know what that game is?
Tell me.
You'll be amazed. Risk.
Really?
Yes.
You don't find it utterly insufferable?
No, absolutely not. No, and I have to be clear here. Nowadays it's Risk Legacy, but it's always been Risk, really. Because I don't find it insufferable. I don't understand this thing that says that it's insufferable. If you find it insufferable, I suspect you're playing it wrong. I don't know. Do people know the missions cards?
You see, I tried to play Risk Legacy, and I couldn't get along with it at all. And it felt like to me that it was an interesting idea built upon rotten foundations. No. Because I do find Risk really hard. I prefer Axis and Allies, even though Axis and Allies is probably a lot longer.
Oh, it seems
to be more rigorous. You get team play, which is interesting. But I've always found Risk difficult. But as a respected board game journalist, defend Risk to all the people who are rolling their eyes now.
Well, oh my God. Why do I have to defend it? Okay, because it's what it comes back to what I said before. It's all about the excitement. It's all about having a fistful of plastic and feeling those cubes rolling inside your hand and not knowing when they're going to come out and not knowing whether or not your one army left in Irkutsk is going to successfully see off the 5 invading from North America. It could happen. It could happen. You never know until those dice fall down, until the card play is finished. There are so many great stories like that, like the time Risk Legacy that we managed to nuke the entirety of North Africa just to find out what would happen if we nuked the entirety of North Africa. And my God, they were wonderful. These are stories you're never going to forget. My Risk board is covered, before I had a Risk Legacy, my Risk board was covered in coffee cups and burns and wine stains, and every one of those was a wonderful memory. Is that any better?
Yeah, that's loads better.
Okay, right. It's probably me with the thunderstorm then. I am
so
now.
where did you get to?
So essentially, I went off on a long rambling monologue about how exciting it is to roll dice and peel cards and all the stories that you get, the things that you remember, and how my Risk board, my actual Risk board, not my Legacy Risk board, before there was Legacy Risk board, is covered in wine stains and cigarette burns and all sorts of exciting things that remind you of all the fun times that you had with friends.
Jeff Engelstein invented this term, input and output randomness. Input where you know from the beginning what the random factor is. It's about mitigating it, or output randomness, which is essentially combat resolution in a game like Risk. You don't get frustrated by the fact that sometimes, even despite your best efforts, chance just conspires to make sure you don't succeed then.
No, not at all. If I turn that on its head, if you play a game where everything is totally deterministic and is totally skill-based, there is no excitement. There is no drama. There is no story in that. I mean, sure, you can play chess, great, and you'll measure your skill on that given day against the guy that you're playing against, but that's not what brings me pleasure in games. It's part of it. There's a great song. I don't know where I heard this from. I don't know the tune. But it's an old English public school anthem. And one of the verses goes...
We hate the poor. We hate the poor.
It wouldn't surprise me. That's probably the first verse. I can't remember now. But anyway, it goes that luck is good, the prize is pleasant, but the glory is in the game.
But isn't there a notion that you have a grand idea and you slowly work up to it, and through don't games, because Risk is more of an admirable evocation of life, in the sense that sometimes, even despite your best efforts, you will fail. Isn't it sometimes just really nice to be rewarded for skill, and for skill to be the primary factor, because in life it just ain't?
Well, there's a lot in that question. I mean, first of all, I'd argue that depending on which version of Risk you're playing, there is quite a lot of skill in Risk. It's not just all about... Otherwise, you might just shoot craps, okay? And
so it's not about just having the luck to be drawn in Australia.
No, this is what I say. It's what Risk... This is where I go old-fashioned Risk. No, it's not just about the luck to be drawn in Australia, because you've got to negotiate successfully, you've got to keep hold of Australia, you've got to lay down your card sets properly. As Risk has gone on, and I'm not going to defend old-fashioned Risk too hard, but it's gone through various iterations all the way up to Risk Legacy, a lot of that's been smoothed away. I mean, you've played Risk Legacy. Do you think that your bad experience with it was genuinely because of the game, or is it because you had bad memories of playing vanilla Risk?
No, I think it was because I didn't go into it, because when I was teaching, I used to teach kids English, and we used to play Risk as a sort of reward, and it meant I didn't have to prepare a lesson. So I actually have quite nice memories of Risk, because it got me off work. And if my life's work is anything, it is finding new ways to get around the idea of actually doing your job. And I was quite excited to try Risk Legacy, but I just found the game rudimentary, and I know this sounds tremendously conceited.
No.
But I just thought I kind of got past this now. Their games are better, right?
I mean, games are better, but I still think Risk Legacy is fantastic. I mean, Risk Legacy is better. It's a better version of Risk.
But as I say, I felt like it was built on rotten foundations.
Okay,
and that's
but you can turn this thing over. Okay, let's turn it over again and say. So, from my point of view, you can say it's built on rotten foundation, but to me, most worker placement games are the same. When I sit down to play a worker placement game, most of them I just find, I mean, okay, yeah, skill can dominate, but it is the same puzzle rejigged with different parameters.
This is true, and I agree with you on this, but isn't that reading mystery novels? Isn't that watching superhero films? Isn't there a joy in the reiteration of the familiar? This is why people, when they land in New York, they head to McDonald's rather than the good burger place down the road, because sometimes the familiar is just comforting, right?
And sometimes you just want to play Risk.
Absolutely.
This is essentially the point that I'm making, is really a lot of the criticisms that you're making can be turned upside down and thrown back and said, well, you know, you're making this criticism because you don't like this style of game, not because it's necessarily anything wrong with the game. What it boils down to is a very simple thing, which is that it seems to me you are somebody that enjoys mastery of a system. That's a guess. I don't know. You enjoy striving for mastery of a system. I'm somebody that enjoys the excitement of the rolling with the punches, trying to master the chaos, if you like.
And I guess a lot of criticism is about having an opinion and then finding a logical reason for that opinion to exist.
Absolutely. Right? I'm absolutely convinced of that. You know, I've opined on that before on Twitter and whatnot, as to I wonder how much criticism, and this isn't just board game criticism, I think it applies to all sorts of game criticism, novel criticism generally. How many reviews are written, bad reviews have been written because some guy sat down in the cinema and he'd had a bad hot dog before he went in.
Right.
And he felt ill.
And it's absolutely true. I mean, with games, hopefully you play them more than once.
Well, I don't. So, you take my point, though. Is that all I'm saying is yes, a lot of it is you are trying to find a logical argument, trying to find reasons to support what's actually a very instinctual gut reaction to your play of the game.
It's so interesting, and we'll do a quick sidebar on this, because I played Caelus for the first time at the weekend, and what really struck me, because you were talking about worker placement games, is that kind of every worker placement game since is a reaction to Caelus and Agricola and an attempt to make them more, what's a word I can use, accommodating, easier,
really?
More like Skinner boxes.
So you think
yeah, because Caelus,
Feast for Odin is a simpler, more accessible version of Caelus and...
No, but I think A Feast for Odin is a designer going through a particularly dodgy phase of his career. But, I look at you look at the innovations that have come into worker placement, that idea that you don't have a separate placement phase, that you place and you get, the idea that more than one worker can go on a space, that you have special workers, that even if a space is full up, you can still place that worker there. What I found about Caelus is how unremitting and unforgiving it is. One thing I don't know about Feast for Odin, but one thing you can say about Caverna, which I have played, is that it's a more forgiving Agricola, right? There is this idea that we should be rewarded and there should be no struggle. And do you think games are going in that direction?
No, I don't. This is an ongoing debate. This has been going on for years. If you go back to Martin Wallace's heyday, I mean, he's still producing great games now, but the classic stuff like Brass and Age of Steam, they are some of the most punishing games I have ever played. Age of Steam, you can play that for 2 hours. You make a mistake on the first turn, you can screw your entire game over. Stuffed. Right? That is unforgiving. And we were having those discussions back then, and some people think that's marvellous, and some people think that's awful. Because if you sat down with 3 experienced Age of Steam players and you stuff your entire game up in the first turn, that's 2 hours of your life completely wasted. And it's interesting because this goes back to where we came in with Risk, in a way, because this is your comforting familiar game versus your struggle for mastery, isn't it? Writ large. It's the same sorts of things again. What do you want out of a game?
But is the idea of mastery exclusive from the idea of comfortable and familiar? Because my comfortable familiar game, one that I know how to play and that I know when I set on the table will be enjoyable, is Lancaster. But I still, even though that game is comforting and fun, I still strive to be as good as I can at it.
Okay, but that, I think, is partly dependent on, again, who you're playing with. We're going around in circles in this conversation because you can only get that level. I'll tell you a game that I play for comfort, that I can play when I'm feeling ill, that I can play, tired, whatever. However exhausted I am, I can just want to shut myself down and play on autopilot for 10 minutes. This is a video game, obviously not a board game. It's Hearthstone. You ever play Hearthstone?
I briefly got into it and then thought, no, it's not for me. Yeah. I've tried these sort of board game implementation-y thingies. Yep. And I prefer the analog, I'm afraid. Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, I'm not going to stat here and have that debate with you. The point is that
I've got to that level with it because I've played it thousands and thousands of games of Hearthstone I've played, okay? And because it's a video game, I can just slip into that comfortable routine and just do it on autopilot. And one of the reasons that Risk is my comfortable game with my friends is because I've been playing Risk with my friends for 35 years. And it is, so everybody knows it, everybody knows how everybody else plays, and we can do it partly on autopilot and just enjoy one another's companies. I said earlier, I like to game with my friends. Not all my friends are gamers, which is one of the reasons that Risk is our go-to thing when we get together. And we do. I have introduced them to other games, but Risk keeps coming out again and again and again. But to get what you've said, to go back to your original question, to get the pleasure of mastery with a punishing game requires that everybody sat around that table knows each other well, they know the game well, and they know how each other play well. And that scenario is quite rare.
For sure. Absolutely. I mean, I almost never sit down around a gaming table and play a game that I don't have to explain the rules to at least one person at the table.
Exactly.
It almost never happens.
So for all the austere majesty of Wallace, Age of Steam, and Brass and whatnot, that is the key problem with them. It's a pie in the sky thing. We like the idea of let's play Age of Steam, let's really challenge ourselves as a group, but the reality is there's always somebody at the table who's new and who is going to get sucked under by that game or its ilk.
Absolutely. Well, I was speaking to Benny Kenobi, and he told me rather a sad story, and I was quite surprised. I was quite tearful at the end and disconcertingly aroused too. So he says, as with many of us, when I got into games, I got in hard. I think it was his use of the word hard with such venom that... Anyway, spending all my spare cash on games to get that next dopamine hit, watching hundreds of videos, searching for that perfect game, moving closer to the massive collection of games on Kallax shelves that all the guys on YouTube have, taking every opportunity to game, badgering my family to join me whether they wanted to or not, and failing to empathise with anyone who didn't want to play increasingly heavy games, Euro or Ameritrash miniature games. I didn't care. I know I'm talking about this as if it were a drug addiction, but honestly, that's not far from how it felt. It took what was basically an intervention from my family to bring me back to sanity. And when I woke up from my mania, I took a long, hard look at myself and reassessed what the hobby is to me. This meant taking a big step back, banning myself from buying new games for a period, focusing on spending time with my family, doing what they wanted to do. I mean, have you ever, because I remember when I first got into games, I never had the money for it to spiral out of control. But, I did buy a lot of games. I spent all of my time listening to podcasts, watching, YouTube videos on board gaming, feeling like I'd missed out for so long, and then I was just compressing all of this knowledge into sort of 3 or 4 months of intense obsession. Did you ever have that with games, and did you ever feel that it was unhealthy? And if not, have you seen people who that's happened to?
I'm not aware of anybody that it's happened to that I know. I think I experience that very often in a much smaller scale, if that makes sense. So I think I've had that feeling for years and years, but it's not with anywhere near that intensity. I'll give you a really good example that happened to me just today. So I'm sat here now on the beach, not next to my game collection on the shelves, and up here there's a game called Spy Club, which is my youngest daughter's favourite game. And next to it there is a new game called Copenhagen, which, I don't know, have you played it?
I've reviewed it.
You've reviewed it. Okay, sorry, I missed that one. Did you like it?
Back in those salad days when the world was just Brexit and Donald Trump rather than zombies and irradiated clowns.
Barely changed.
Yeah, I loved it.
Barely changed at all.
Yeah, well, indeed. No, I thought it was lovely.
Okay, I haven't played it yet. So that's sat there ready to play. And I said to my daughter this afternoon, I said, should we play some games? And I was going to get Copenhagen out because I wanted to play it because it was new and I wanted to, I wanted to write up a review of it at some point. And my youngest daughter said, Spy Club! And I said, oh no, I wanted to play this new game. And I saw her face fall. And I put Copenhagen back on the shelf and I got Spy Club out because you've got to. And we had a wonderful game of Spy Club and we lost horribly. It's a cooperative game and we did really badly because it's the first time we played in ages. And it's actually quite a hard game for a game that's played aimed at kids. And one that I would recommend people check out if they like co-op games. But that is my daily battle writ large, if you like. I am in games media. There is a pressure on me to play and review new games, and so that's what I inflict on all my friends and family, whereas almost all of my friends and family, I think, really would actually just like to play a game for the 10th time rather than, learn a new one every time I come around.
Yeah, so we were in, as you would remember, we were in the beach aviary today, and we were talking, and it's quite, for the listeners, it's quite sort of cute when you're in the aviary, and it's great, there's birds with 2 heads and all that sort of stuff, and, when you converse, they say, oh, you're in the aviary conversing, oh, so you're tweeting to each other. So there was something happening in the aviary today, and people were talking about sort of media and all of this, but this sense of people not wanting negativity in their hobby and this sense of consumerism, and this is obviously what Ben Davey was inflicted with. Do you think there is a sort of pushing of that idea of consumption around the hobby, and somehow you're not really a gamer unless you have all the new stuff as soon as it comes out?
No, I don't. I think this is all back to front in some respects, because while that goes on, I'm not denying for a second that it goes on. It's definitely true that there is this kind of, this drive towards consumption, but I think it comes from who gamers are, because gamers like to keep their pieces in nice neat stacks, and they also like to keep their games in nice neat stacks, and they're just people. There's a general personality type, if you like, that goes with gaming, that happens to like collecting things and like organising things and is worried about missing out on things, and that then drives a culture of consumerism. And people feel the need to make excuses for it, I think, because, there's a reason why your pile of unplayed games is called the pile of shame. And because people don't want to feel ashamed, they invent excuses to justify their purchase of new games.
And so you don't worry that... So we were talking about... When we were in the aviary, this analogy is frankly...
You really are pushing it very hard. I'm enjoying it very, but you came up with that on the fly. Very much enjoying it.
The world I build. That's, if I'm anything, I'm a world builder.
You should be a dungeon master. Come on, you were saying about Dungeons and Dragons earlier.
Well, when we go back to the compound, that's one of my responsibilities. And honestly, after you've whipped for a couple of weeks. It gets quite pedestrian and workaday, but there we are. But there's this sort of worry that there's no trust. So board game media is all about, should you buy this? Is this buy-worthy? And then couple that with the idea that there's no trust because everyone's in the hands of big cardboard. I mean, to what degree do you think that's a conspiracy theory? Or do you think it's true that the very nature of the structure around media means that people are going to push stuff even if they don't like it?
It's a knot of different things. The biggest problem with board game media, and this is a beast that I've been whipping for a long time, is the lack of professionalism. And when I say professionalism, I don't talking about standards. I'm talking about literal professionalism, about an editor, who can hand out money to pay people to do reviews and protect them from the backlash, if you like, both from the public potentially and from publishers, leaving a reviewer free to say what they want. So, because that's...
essentially trying to get rid of any conflict of interest, right?
Yes, basically. Yes, that's what it comes down to. And without that, you are driven completely by either... what motivates people to do reviews. To start with, of course, it's love of the hobby. I mean, it is. Let's be honest. Let's not pretend that people don't still do it because they love games. But when you've got to the point of people who are getting review copies, of course they want to do reviews, to help them get review copies. And at the same time, people who get crowdfunded, they want... the crowd to carry on funding them, don't they? And both of those things essentially depend upon you saying nice things about games. Now, I don't always say nice things about games, but to be honest, generally, if I don't have a good thing to say about a game, I simply won't review it.
Right. So why? Do you not think it's also part of your obligation to point out if something's not very good, to protect the people who are listening to you and reading you?
Yes and no. I think that nowadays, and I genuinely believe this, I mean, we can go on about consumerism, and that's fine, and the cult of the new, and the way that we are being deluged in new games, which I think is a serious problem. But the fact is that when I joined the hobby, when I became a board gamer proper, is that the focus of my hobby, maybe about 20 years ago, something like that, there were bad games around. And when I first started writing a review, I was not afraid to say, this is a bad game. People have got better at designing games. I actually genuinely think there are relatively few bad games that make it to market nowadays, let alone to the public attention to the point where they're being reviewed by well-known faces in board gaming. I genuinely believe that most games are actually quite good nowadays.
But I mean, as the standard rises, so does the standard of what's good, though, no? And so what might have been good in previous fallow times is no longer good because everything else is better. Is there no truth in that?
I'm not quite sure what you mean. If you mean are older games less worth playing, generally, yeah.
No. Oh, God, no, because I'm going through an older game phase. No, but what I mean is that if you... Okay, I'm going to put this in terms that I understand, because I'm a simple man. If you're being served manure for breakfast, lunch and dinner, right? You get used to the taste of shit and you say, okay, shit tastes pretty good. But then, if things change and you're getting served muesli, then you think, well, what was really good shit is still fundamentally shit, whereas this muesli is great. That's not clarified anything, is it?
No, not really, no. Because essentially, I suppose what I'm saying is, I'll recast your question slightly, because you were saying, is my duty partly to protect people from rubbish? And what I'm saying is, essentially, there isn't really any rubbish. And there are so many games. I mean, there is, but it's really, really quite rare. I'm struggling to think now of a game that I've really tossed. That there have been one or two this year that I've really not gotten with, and I can't actually think of any names at the moment because I'm on the spot. But
it's interesting because I know we differ on this, but I wrote a pretty negative review of Wildlands. I love Martin Wallace, but I found the game to be unengaging, without any tension, to be... It felt constraining in the worst kinds of ways, and it didn't feel like you could do anything cool. Now, I know your opinion of that is different, but I didn't feel obliged that I have to write a negative review, but I was writing a review of it, and I thought, well, just because I don't like the game doesn't mean I'm not going to write the review. And actually, I find that the challenge of being negative without just being a dick quite a fun writing challenge too, right?
Yes. But that's a different thing. You're saying you wanted to write a negative review because you had a negative reaction to a game, but there's a fun challenge in writing a negative review. Sure there is, sure. I mean, I did not like, and I still do not like, Century, Spice Road. I think it's a poor game because it's front-loaded. This is my biggest problem with it, is that all the excitement is in the first half of that game, and then it just trundles away to nothing. You can often tell who's going to win 5 or 6 turns in advance because you can see where the engines are going to take them. That's not what I want from a game. I want a game that's going to grow in excitement and challenge, not less so. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So I do. That was the last game I think I actually wrote up a negative review of, because it was it's a popular game, and so I felt I had to do what you said, okay? And actually, I'm going to put my opinion up there as a counterpoint, because this is a popular game. People might just buy it on the strength of that popularity, and people ought to know that there are problems with it, in my point of view.
But how do you deal with the obvious thing? Because when a publisher gives you a game to review, there is an agreement that you will produce a review of the game. What if then you just don't like the game? Because you've agreed to review the game, then you're under an obligation to review the game whether it's good or not now.
Well, I'm in a very lucky position in this regard, because while that might have been true a few years ago, you're probably aware I've been involved with the wonderful Owen Duffy with writing the board game book, and I actually get sent some of the review copies I get now are intended primarily for consideration for the book. So I have the beginnings of what I was talking about earlier in terms of I can't remember what you called it now. You had a great phrase for it, which I forgot now. But that editorial protection, yeah. And I don't have to review everything that I'm sent, and things that I do want to review, I have to run past the editor and the rest of the team first to talk about whether it should be included and whether or not it should be me that reviews it.
Well, something like the board game book, I think, is an elegy to the hobby, right?
Yes.
And so it's not about negativity. So
it is, because this was shown. This question was asked of Owen, I know, when he ran the crowdfunding thing from the book, and it is in the sense that although it's a eulogy to the hobby and it's full of positivity, look at what didn't make the cut.
Well, of course, I was just about to say that it's about what you don't... Criticism is implied in what you don't include as opposed to what you do. Right?
Yes, absolutely, yeah. So I'm in a lucky position now, and when to go back to the question that brought us down this garden path, when I was just getting stuff from publishers for Fortress of Meritash, I did write more negative reviews.
And so I was speaking to Crystal Paisano the other day, just before I was coming to the beach. She was very nice. She gave me some sunblock. I'm not using it because I like the colour, but she said, and it kind of leads on from this, what we've been talking about. She said, if I'm looking at every game I play from the perspective of how will I review this, or I can talk about this on an upcoming episode of The Blitz, or this would make a great Instagram photo, I think sometimes I miss some core of the fun within the game and the nuance of the experience playing it. Do you sometimes find yourself, because I do sometimes find myself playing a lot of games because I have to get them reviewed, and sometimes just think, I need to just sit down and play something that I'm playing for the enjoyment of simply playing it, not to produce a piece at the end.
Yeah, I do, absolutely. And I try quite hard not to get sucked into that too much, because I have to remember that I am tremendously lucky to have that opportunity.
Yeah.
To have that opportunity to play and review so many games, that is a blessing. And I would be lying if I said it doesn't come with a downside, because it does, and it's what you've just mentioned. And I would be lying if I said that it doesn't drag me down quite frequently, because it does. But when you look at that from the other side of the table, because ultimately we produce content and we write reviews so that people can read them, and if you look at the point of view of the people who read the reviews and listen to the podcasts, it is not fair on them to treat it as anything other than a delight, because it is. You know, look at all people. You get used to a certain way of being, you know, and something that was once wonderful becomes routine, and you owe it to people, and this is what I try and remind myself, you owe it to the people who are consuming your content to remember how wonderful it was without that downside. You're effectively doing a job. You've turned your hobby into a job. And however wonderful that sounds, it comes with a downside, which means you can't always do what you want.
Yeah, and it's inevitable that, you know, I mean, look at me, for instance. I get into the compound, I'm bumming around, picking up, you know, growing pumpkins and sort of picking up dirt and things, and someone says to me, you can have the cattle prod and cattle prod the zombies down in the basement. And, you know, I think, my God, I've just wanted to cattle prod things for my entire life, and now I get to do it as a job. And as I said, after 2 weeks of cattle prodding, I don't want to prod anymore, which is, you know, everything becomes a job essentially, right?
Yes, exactly. Or anything that you turn into a job becomes tiresome to some extent. End of story.
Well, I'm gonna head off back inside now and get one of the pina coladas, because they're great, because they have depleted uranium, so they're extra fizzy. Can I get you something?
An old-fashioned.
If you want to come to the guild, slip on your floral shorts over your hazmat suit and pack your Factor 500, then go to Board Game Geek Guild number 3209. And now, if you're thirsty, may I recommend a cool glass of Thorium?